I'd have happily stayed for longer.
Well, we'll see if we can get through the text an hour. If not, we'll jump around a bit. But our topic this evening is a timely one, but not one that many people have on their diary. So the 11th of Ḥeshvan. Ḥeshvan is known notoriously as being a month that has nothing interesting in it whatsoever, much to rabbis' pleasure, typically. But the 11th of Ḥeshvan is, in many communities, and according to legend, the Yom Hilula, the Nachala, the Yartzeit, whatever word you use, of Raḥel. And on the 11th of Ḥeshvan, there was often many pilgrimages, there still are, to Rachel's tomb. People would tie their red strings. There would be all sorts of religious customs that developed in some communities. And as a result, a lot of people had a particular association with the 11th of Ḥeshvan being a auspicious day, especially for mercy.
And Rachel's tomb is where? I thought she died on the side of the road.
Yeah, so it is still on the side of the road. It's, if I'm not mistaken, I haven't been. I think it's just outside Efrat in the West Bank. Is that right? Somewhere on the way to
yeah,
in between Beit Lechem and Jerusalem.
Sort of ignominious death, I always imagine. But...
Indeed, yeah, she dies in childbirth in pain. She names her final son the son of my suffering, and then his father Jacob renames him to make it the son of my right hand instead. So he becomes Binyamin instead of Ben Oni. It's an interesting, complicated moment, and for whatever reason, Rachel is transformed by our tradition into a figure that's not uncommon in mythology, especially ancient Near East, which is the sort of the mother who intervenes on our behalf. And this gets super developed in Kabbalah in the figure of the Shekhinah, who has a lot in common with Rachel, who Rachel is often a stand-in for. And it also plays a big role, by the way, in the eventual immersion and emergence of the idea of the Virgin Mary in Christian literature, of the kind of mother figure version of Mary, Mother Mary, who intervenes on behalf of her children. And all of that emerges from our tradition originally through some Midrashim and through the prophet Jeremiah. And what I want to do this evening is look at those texts and then look at some modern piyutim, some religious poetry written in honor of Rachel, and see if maybe it offers us some insight into what this figure, this myth, might help for us today when we're particularly worried perhaps about Israel and about its safety and security. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully everyone is able to see that. I'm going to make it bigger, and I'm going to start, and hopefully, as we usually do with these sort of things, everyone will help me with the reading. Those at least who can see the screen. I realize if you're on a phone, it might be tricky, but I'm going to start with this passage from Jeremiah, which is where this whole myth begins. Jeremiah, of course, himself lives a very long time after Rachel. He might seem very old to us, being that he's one of the prophets of the Tanakh, but he is at least probably 1,000 years after Raḥel, in terms of our history and chronology. And he himself, by his point, has this image that he passes on to us of Raḥel weeping for her children. Someone will read this first one. You can do it in English, although the Hebrew is there if you feel game for it. Yeah, Jackie, please.
Thus said God, a cry is heard in Ramah, wailing, bitter weeping. Rachel weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children who are gone. Thus said God, restrain your voice from weeping, your eyes from shedding tears, for there is a reward for your labor, declares God. They shall return from the enemy's land, and there is hope for your future, declares God. Your children shall return to their country.
Okay. So a fair amount encapsulated in a brief passage here from Jeremiah, again, in the context of prophecy. But what's the image of Rachel here that he puts forward? Without much explanation, he just kind of shows, oh, by the way, Rachel's there.
It's often, I would have expected the word Jerusalem, or Zion. Rachel, Jerusalem is weeping for her children, or Zion is weeping for her children, or...
Yeah. This is the same guy who wrote Eicha, right? Lamentations.
Yeah.
And there it's all about Bat Zion, right? Jerusalem, the princess who's weeping, who's alone. It's almost like he substituted that with Rachel here.
Where does he get that from? Why put Raḥel in here?
We don't know. We can
No.
assume it was a folk tradition, right? That this is something that was familiar to the people he was speaking to. It's almost, and it's hard because of a lot of these traditions around feminine spirituality and particularly feminine aspects of the divine are often really repressed and suppressed. And so there's confusing, overlapping imagery. But it seems like that imagery of Jerusalem, the city, as a feminine entity, the princess who sits alone, is kind of coterminous with Rachel, who personifies that kind of mother figure of the people, and he uses them almost interchangeably. But she's there weeping, unable to stop weeping. God is in some way the antagonist of the story, who says to her, stop crying, stop shedding tears, don't worry, they're going to come back eventually, right? Your children are going to return. This imagery is so prominent throughout the Tanakh. Hundreds of years before Jeremiah, in the Psalms, we have David talk about Aim Habanim Smecha, right? A mother of children is happy. We sing that in Hallelujah, right? That a woman without children is miserable, but a mother of children is happy. Now, we can probably judge that poorly from our own modern point of view, but the imagery of fertility and how that represents the people makes a certain kind of sense. So Raḥel is put into this mythological framework, although Jeremiah doesn't give us very much to go on. Thankfully, as usual, the Midrashim come to give us a bit more. So we have here a Midrash from Eicha Rabbah. So this is again looking at Lamentations, the book of, and looking at the story of Jeremiah, who supposedly authored it, and which is here trying to describe what is going on in the background, right? The Midrashim are always trying to fill in the gaps. When Jeremiah said, Raḥel is there weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted, the Midrash goes, what does that mean? What is he talking about? Exactly as you said, Jackie. So they invent a story to explain to us what was happening and what's the background on it. Anyone up to read this story here from Eicha Rabbah?
I'm happy to, if that's
John.
okay.
Yeah, please.
Our mother Raḥel broke forth in speech and said before the Holy One, Master of the universe, it is revealed and known before you that your servant Jacob cherished a great love for me. Because of me, he worked for my father 7 years. When the time for the marriage to my husband arrived, my father conspired to substitute my sister for me, yet I was not jealous of my sister and did not expose her to shame. Now, if I, who am flesh and blood, dust and ashes, was not jealous of my rival, then why should you, the living, merciful, and enduring King, be jealous of idols with no ultimate reality, and banish my children because of them? At once the mercy of the Holy One crested, and he said, for your sake, O Raḥel, I will restore Israel to their place.
Okay, so what's the backstory here that Jeremiah doesn't mention?
The expulsion of the Jews from the land of Israel nominally because of idolatry.
Right, nominally idolatry. And Raḥel comes to do what? What's her role relative to this triangulation of God, the Israelites, and Raḥel? Who is she to these two peoples?
Well, she's like Abraham in negotiating, isn't she, around saving the people of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Very good. Yeah.
I was also thinking of the golden calf.
Ooh, okay. Say more.
But I think she makes a really powerful argument that maybe only she could make.
Why? What is her argument? Why can only she make it? What is she asking God to do?
Not be jealous.
Yeah.
What is it? I, your God, am a jealous God.
Elkanah. Yeah.
And she's going like, why?
She's asking God to get
why are you jealous? I wasn't jealous of Leah. So what are you doing being jealous of people worshipping idols which are actually nothing?
She wants God to get some perspective.
Yes, to get some perspective. And she's doing that by making a very personal point to say, listen, if I can do it, you can do it. And I mean, the English here actually, which I believe I pulled off Safari originally, actually doesn't translate the whole Hebrew, right? Those, if you're reading the Hebrew, you may have noticed. Because when you look at what it describes, if we just jump over, she says, oh yes, my father conspired to switch my sister for me, and I didn't out her, right? I didn't expose her to shame. But then it goes on to say, I also gave over to her signs that could be used to signify me to my husband, right? So it implies that she actually consented to the switch and gave Leah things that she could use to pretend to be her, in order that it would be successful, right? So Raḥel actually aided in the substitution, it would seem, once she found it out. And it goes on and says, Velo od, not only this, but also I went down underneath the bed that they were lying upon, him and my sister, and I spoke while she was quiet in order to return an answer for each and every word. Right? So this Midrash envisions something that the Torah does not describe, which is that Raḥel, when she realizes she's going to be swapped for her sister, actually works with the Khan, collaborates with the Khan, and rather than embarrass Leah, who Jacob doesn't want and who is being put in this position, she actually helps her to pretend to be herself, which is remarkable in some way. It's kind of self-effacing, but also quite self-destructive. And she's using this as a really extreme example of, if I can do this, you can too, right? To imagine her on the wedding night, hiding under the bed, speaking to Jacob, and Leah is completely quiet, like she's a ventriloquist, is incredible, right? Bizarre and quite intense image. Because it means that this wasn't something that was pulled over on Raḥel. She was actively aware of and involved in it. And even though she didn't want it, she didn't stop it because she didn't want to hurt her sister. That changes the dynamic of the story quite a bit, right? A story we're going to read in a few weeks, which normally we see as, Raḥel as the innocent victim in some way, Jacob less so, and Leah is kind of put in this spot. But if Raḥel helped her and aided her in this, then it changes it a little bit, right? Even more so, she can say to God, listen, I was willing to do all this stuff so that I didn't embarrass my sister. You're not willing to deal with a few idols who, by the way, are just stone. Quite a profound way to point out God's insecurities. Hi, Sarah and Shiloh. Okay, so we have this backstory now from Lamentations, and we have this imagery from Jeremiah of Raḥel advocating for her children, doing so, as you said, Johnny, in a very Abrahamic way, right? Of confronting God and saying, you know what, you can do better than this. If I can do it, you can do it. If there's 10 good people in Sodom, maybe that's enough. And it works, right? The key thing is that it works. In the Jeremiah passage, God responds and says, stop crying, it's okay. I'll do it, right? Men are always very uncomfortable with women crying in their presence. God says, don't worry, I'll do what you want. I'll bring back your children. And here in the Lamentations Midrash, we also have the sense that God goes, okay, I'll bring Israel back. Right? So God does it somewhat begrudgingly, and only because Raḥel continues to intervene for them constantly. She is their defense attorney in some way, and their advocate in this realm of these figures of mythology. Any thoughts on that before we move on? Yeah. Okay. So what I want to take a look at is now these are modern piyutim. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. So there's a very long, we're going to try and work our way through it, but a long piyut meant to be recited in synagogue, which is written by Yehuda Fataya, who is a fairly modern 20th century, and believe he died in the 1950s, Iraqi rabbi, who wrote several piyutim in honor of the matriarchs. This whole debate that we have today about whether to include the matriarchs in prayers, it actually was kind of a moot point in many Sephardic communities, where there was huge amounts of prayers devoted to the matriarchs. And in particular, there was 2 sets of prayers at midnight, one devoted to Raḥel and one devoted to Leah, based on the Kabbalah, called Tikkun Chatzot. Chacham Fataya wrote this kind of poem, really, almost an epic poem, in honor of Raḥel. and describing in even more detail this image of her as an advocate. And so he takes the bits from Jeremiah, and he takes the bits from Eicha Rabbah, and he spins it into an even more elaborate and interesting story. So I think for ease, I might read this so we can pause and go, and hopefully we get a chance to discuss. So let's just start at the top. If anyone wants to chant the Hebrew, by the way, it does rhyme. You might notice it makes for a really good poem and goes well to many tunes. I'm not going to sing it, but just to say. So recall the merit of Raḥel, recall the divine to your wandering children. She who entered into her suffering at her wedding night, at her wedding on a night of vigilance, right? So that's again the image of her entering willingly into the suffering of helping her sister. She who was humbled under her bed, and who answered from there with words, with a crying voice, screaming out, "Please listen from above." So they're combining these images. Her under the bed on her wedding night, pretending to be her sister, or rather helping her sister pretend to be her, and her crying out in Ramah, which is a high place, but also a particular place in the West Bank today, to God to advocate for her children. Please listen from above. A voice is heard in Ramah, knocking over walls. It is heard even far away, yowling and pleading for the one buried in the course of her journeys. Right? That's herself. She's the one buried in the course of her journey. So we have this language of her being the buried one, Hanik Beret, which is itself really interesting. What does she say? She says, "Where is Yosef?" That's her son, of course, Joseph. "Where is the one who corresponds to me, my youngest son? Where is the son of my suffering?" That's Binyamin. "I cannot see him, and he does not suckle my breasts." So she kind of wakes up. We have to imagine this is all myth and legend, right? She wakes up after death and is a kind of elevated spirit in some way, and she's distressed at not being able to find her two children. She went on to ask of the ancestors, "Where are my beloved children?" She's searching them out, and she's going to ask all of the other people around, "What did you do with my children?" They told her to go and ask Amram's son, that's Moses, buried on the border mountain. He dies, of course, on Mount Nebo, as we read about a little bit ago. She says to him, "My son, Moshe, don't be silent. Where did you leave the flocks?" Right, so she's confronting him, saying, "Where are the children? What did you do with them? Where did you put my children?" A voice was heard from the grave, lamenting with a stammering voice, "Why, lovely, are you wandering, searching these mountains?" She said, "I'm obligated to break the barrier, but it is not yet time." So this conversation takes place between, it seems, her and someone buried nearby, whether that's Moses or another kind of being from some supernal realm is not clear. That's quite a strange idea, but it sounds like the voice comes out of the grave and is heard, and she responds to it saying, "It's not yet time, but I'm searching out the children." So there's almost a messianic expectation that she's going to bring them back. Moses says, "I left them with your son Joshua," right, Hoshua. So typical kind of passing the blame. That's going to be a theme. So Moses says, "I left them with Joshua." So she goes to find Joshua. "Joshua, my son, answer me," she says. "Where are the tribes?" Seeing her tears and her despair, he too started crying for the nation. The sound of their weeping and pleading arose to the highest heavens. Yehoshua said, "Be still, my mother, just for a moment, lest I die." So Joshua is very affected by Rachel's confrontation with him. He says, "I left them in charge of the elders and the kings of the Davidic line, the shepherds." So he says, "Oh, it's okay, don't worry. I left them in charge of the monarchy, right? We have David and Solomon, and they have a kingdom, and everything's fine." All of these people in the spirit realm seem to think that, "Oh, it's fine, don't worry, I left them with this guy." She went from there in a hurry and came to the graveyards of the city of Zion. That's Jerusalem, of course. They said to her in that sacred abode, "There you should seek them, and there you will find them." Right, so quite a grim proclamation in which she's told, you're looking for your children, you'll find them here, buried under Jerusalem. Okay, so we have this now confrontation between her and Jerusalem. Someone else want to pick up from here? Don't want to hear myself talking too much. Someone who hasn't read yet?
Sorry for not offering. I've been to the opticians and they put stuff in my eyes and it's so blurry.
That's okay.
And I'm so sorry.
No, just listen. That's fine. Anyone else keen to read? I can go on, but you're probably sick of me. Sarah? Is that a hand I saw off screen? You gotta take yourself off mute if it was.
It wasn't, but I'll read it.
Oh, thank you.
When Raḥel saw that the walls had fallen and the sacred stones were tumbled down, and there were no priests and no Levites and no ark and no ketuvim, sorry, it's very small.
That's okay.
And thank you. She wailed a bitter, desperate cry and threw her shoes from her feet, ripping her multicolored tunic and her scarf and her mantle. She dressed in sackcloth upon her flesh, and she rolled about in the dust. She struck her hand upon the beloved child whom she had lost among the nations, and she tied a rope around the useless nation, making a eulogy like a dragon. She jumped in haste to the supernal El and tore open all of the heavens and rose to the highest hidden height. She stood before the rock of eternities and charged them with an offense against the nation of Sion in sackcloth and with tears and with pleading.
Okay, let's pause you there for a second, Sarah, right? Because we've advanced now. So she first went to look for the children and found Moses in his grave. And he said, oh, it's cool. I left them with Joshua. It's fine. She goes to find Joshua and he says, no, it's cool. I left them with the monarchy. They're all good. They've got a city. They've got a country. It's fine. She goes to find Jerusalem, which of course didn't exist in her time. And instead of finding the beautiful city she was promised full of people, she finds a mound of graves and fallen walls. And there's no priests and no Levites and no ark and no kruvim, the cherubs that were inside the temple. And what does she do? What are these actions that are described here? It's quite dramatic in some way. Some of them hard to translate, by the way. What kind of imagery do we have here? Throwing her shoes off her feet.
He was in mourning.
Mourning?
But clearly very angry.
Yeah.
You know, really mad and tore open heavens, you know, to get to God and said, what on earth are you doing here?
Yeah. Right. There's real anger. This
isn't just sort of nice, pleasant, you know, prayer or pleading. This is,
yeah.
You know,
yeah, she's proper angry. Rightly so. And you know, after getting two people who said, oh, it's fine, that they're okay, and then realizing that's not the case at all, she feels even more perhaps empowered to take the advocacy up in her own regard. There's also some amazing imagery that he uses here in the poem, right? That she ripped her multicolored tunic, right? Katonet pasim. That's of course Joseph's tunic.
What Shiloh's just said, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see in the chat. Yes. So there's all these evocative images where she is depicted in the way that we imagine many of her children as. She rolls around between the rocks, right? She's angry, she's violent to some degree. There's this fascinating image of her tying a rope around the nation as it's bound and making a eulogy like a dragon. Don't really know how to translate that, right? Asta misped kitanim. Maybe I got that wrong with tanin, tamim, but it's a strange phrase in many ways. Misped kitanim. And, you know, we have this imagery of her being really, really angry and jumping in angry. Kafsa bechibazon. She jumps quickly in a rush to find God, El Elyon, supernal El, and she tears open all of the heavens. The closest thing, by the way, that this feels like, if anyone's ever looked at it, is like ancient Near Eastern poetry about Ishtar breaking down the gates of the underworld to try and find her lover Tammuz. There's like a real kind of angry woman on a rampage vibe, which is an established genre of ancient poetry. But remember, this is written probably in about 1920, and it's modern in every sense, but drawing on all of these ancient myths. So she's found God up in the highest height, hiding away is the implication. And she stands before God and charges God with an offense against the nation of Sion. in sackcloth and with tears and with pleading. It's pretty serious adversarial language. So, Sarah, do you want to go on? You were doing excellent. We're at please. Now she's speaking.
Please, my parent, turn towards the pain of my voice. Turn to me in mercy. Only the rock can verify if this nation is lost forever. How can a bride be cast away from her husband to such distances? How can you send a mother from her nest and not at least take the children? How can you abandon the flock when lions roam about? How can you be silent in the face of Edom's children who sacrificed the nation like animals? Is their iniquity not simple? Can it not be cleansed in water? Is it painful before you when 1,000 years are like a day in your eyes? Well, the second millennium has been given over to beasts, and the pain has not ceased. Where is the sign of wonder and responsibility, the appointed meeting place? When will you be merciful? When will you comfort? You push it off from one day to the next until it is awful and their captivity can no longer be redeemed.
Okay, let's pause there because that's the end, at least right now, of her speech. Quite intense speech, right? All mostly rhetorical, angry questions. So just to look back at the latter part, we have some incredible images, right? Again, derived from the Tanakh, including sending away the mother bird from the nest, right? One of the laws of Deuteronomy is that you can't take the eggs unless you send away the mother bird first. Here she's inverting that, right? And saying, how could you send away the mother and not at least take the children? Like she's in pain that actually she's there and they're not. Which is exactly what the mother bird would be experiencing when it returns to the nest and finds all the eggs are gone, right? So she is the mother bird. It's a complete flip of what you'd expect from Deuteronomy. She's abandoning a flock when the lions are about. There's a real sense that they're in danger, and she's angry about it. This language of Edom's children, this is particularly a reference to Christianity and to the Christian West, right? Whenever you talk about Edom in rabbinic literature, you're talking usually about Christendom, even though Edom is a real place. It's was a people who lived in the south of Israel and were kind of siblings of the Israelites. It's used metaphorically and mythologically as a representation of the Christian West in many ways. And so she's particularly now speaking to say, why are you letting them kill my children? Right? Is there iniquity not simple? What did they do so wrong that you can't just cleanse it in water? Right? What did they do so wrong that 1,000 years are necessary when 1,000 years are like one day in your eyes? A quote from Psalms. Right? 2 millennia given over to beasts, and the pain has not ceased. Sorry, someone went to speak and I cut them off. Who was that? No? Come on. Okay, what do we think of her angry plea? She justified. What's the imagery here in terms of femininity? The angry woman, is this a trope? Is this kind of breaking out of the trope?
She's angry for a reason. She reckons that this will help. And so it's a woman's fury.
Mm.
You know. And the fact that this writer has written it in this way seems a positive thing to me.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting for someone who we associate with being, very traditional, so very traditional-minded Iraqi rabbi, but who's writing in a way that makes Rachel very sympathetic and makes her clearly the heroine of the story. There's no doubt when you read the story in this poetic form, right? And he's expanding on a pre-existing story, as we saw, but he's expanding on a way that makes God clearly kind of on the unsympathetic, not bad guy per se, but when we read this, we find ourselves siding with Rachel, going, yeah, you tell him, like, this is unfair, because it's us, of course, that she's talking about. So it creates a really interesting dynamic in some way where we relate to this feminine presence who's confronting the divine on our behalf and pointing out the injustice and calling for things to change. God does get a chance to respond. So let's see what God says. Sarah, do you feel comfortable finishing us off here? You're doing such a good job.
Is that from a voice then?
Yeah.
A voice emerged from the throne. Be silent, my daughter, bride of pine. Wipe the tears from your eyes and hold off on your pleading, for all of your questions and your tears have stirred the supernal ones. Then they rose up to the highest heights and gathered up mercy and said, so Edom will not establish itself on the blood spilt of my servants, and in short time I will bring the just end to all the wicked. I will decree the protests valid, and I will rise up to open the hidden letters of the swallowed souls. To my bride I will say, get up, my light, arise and dress yourself in the garments of your glory. So all the voice of my nation will attest and agree, saying, if we have made mistakes, answer us, and do it for your name's sake. Remember Adonai, your people, for a good design.
Okay. So what do we think of God's response? How is it similar to the very brief mention in Jeremiah and the slightly longer version in Lamentations, Rabbah? What's being expanded upon here in some way? Did it work? Her protest? Yeah.
Not quite, because she's still going to have to wait.
Right. So it's not immediate.
It isn't clear when the redemption is going to happen, is it?
No. And in that way, it does mirror what was said in Jeremiah originally, which is stop crying. Someday they'll come back. But it never exactly says when, right? Same. But there's slightly more assurance here that, don't worry, Edom will not establish itself on the spilt blood of my servants, and eventually I will bring a just end to all the wicked. But she is validated. Literally, right? I declare the protest valid and rise up to open the hidden letters of swallowed souls. All this fascinating imagery in Hebrew. And this language, to my bride, I will say, right? And of course, this is again that kind of feminine personification of the divine, who is Rachel and is not Rachel, and is also the Shekhinah who is exiled from her husband. All this Kabbalistic imagery that we relate to very deeply on Friday night, when we kind of hope to imagine a wedding of these two disparate personalities of God. A familiar quote then occurs from that Friday night service: Kumi ori hitna ari velivshi bigdei hayikarim. This is derivative of the same Isaiah passage that Echadodi is based on, in which we're saying, it's time to get up, get out of the dust, shake off the dust, stand up, my light, dress yourself in the garments of glory. And so there's this statement of God kind of accepting, saying, okay, it's time to go, time to make this right. And everyone in the nation who finally, for the first time, speaks, says, okay, if we've made mistakes, we'll answer us and do it for your name's sake. So give us a chance, right? We'll make things right. We'll do teshuvah, and do it. Asay, this is familiar language from the High Holiday service. Asay na lema'an shemecha, right? Do it for your name's sake. Don't do it for us. Do it for your own sake. Do it for what people might think if you don't actually show the compassion you said you would. Right? Do it because of the reputational impact rather than because of the actual material regard for us. And remember us for a good design or for goodwill. So the function of Raḥel is clearly to provoke this compassion in God, right? And again, thinking of the bird, the mother bird, and the eggs taken, it's all about how we force ourselves to feel compassion to some degree. And Raḥel is this force of nature, this legendary mythological being who, even long after her death, is still advocating for her children, still looking to find them, still pushing God to make sure that they are accounted for and returned and brought back. And there's a little bit of a comfort just in that idea that perhaps we have someone looking out for us, right? An angry mother who's going to rant on our behalf to the distant and punishing father. It's Freudian through and through. It's also really interesting as a kind of mythologem, a bit of legend in the Jewish canon. I'm going to look at one more poem here, which is now in the same culture to some degree. This is a little bit earlier and probably the basis for the latter poem we saw a moment ago. So this is written by a guy named the Ben Ish Chai. His real name was Yosef Chaim of Baghdad. He was one of the leading rabbis of Iraq in the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, and the teacher of the rabbi we read from a moment ago. And we have, again, a poem, again, Bizchut Raḥel Imenu, right? That's the theme we see throughout, in the merit of Raḥel, our mother. So we're praying to God on behalf of Raḥel. We're kind of evoking the merit that she has had and using it as a way to make our own case. So I just wanted to read this as well. And again, the Hebrew is really great here. He did a great job of making a beautiful rhyming, metric poem, but we're not going to sing it. We'll have a look at the English. So he describes it, begins, "Grace us, God, grace us for the merit of Raḥel, our mother. Mercifully set up her shelter, her sukkah, by the way, if you look at the Hebrew. Please end her exile. Please accept her prayers and grace all of us with your favor. Kindly rebuild her house, pay her an income, give her hope in the end, and return us home. Don't let her pine any longer. Fill her soon with every goodness, to live and know she is adored, and gather us from our banishment." So here we're praying for her rather than she's praying for us. It seems to go both ways. We're saying, look after Raḥel, right? Look after our mother, this figure which is both real Raḥel and also a version of the Shekhinah. And we're saying, take her back, build her house up again. That's, of course, Jerusalem. Look after her as you said you would. Say to her, rise and shine. Again, that same language of Isaiah. Kumi, Ori. Shake off the dust. Trust from the beginning, and behold, we will see your beloveds here. Sovereign, ransom and redeem, and lift with strength and divinity the daughters of Israel, and struggle our struggles. So there's a fascinating particular mention here. By the way, I translated that incorrectly. It should be the daughter of Israel, Betulat Yisrael, which is also a virgin of Israel. So we get really close in many ways to what you might see in Marianic Christianity, in which people are praying regarding the Virgin Mary, the Mother Mary, etc. We have similar imagery here. And this language of redemption, redeem and ransom, and lift up and give strength to Betulat Yisrael, literally could be translated as the Virgin of Israel, or a woman of Israel, a daughter of Israel, and struggle her struggles, right? Fight on her behalf. Comfort the mind of the cowering, for to you it is fitting and appropriate to see on Har Zion, that's of course Jerusalem, Mount Zion, your honor, our Elohim. She will quickly rebuild the seat of luxury, lift the needy from the refuse pile. This is a reference to Hannah and her prayer in the book of Samuel. El Elohim from Zion, soon our eyes will see. Right? So there's an image that once God empowers her, this feminine big H her, she is going to rebuild the city and lift up the needy from the dung heap, as Hannah puts it. Banish the slave and the servant, besiege and eradicate in fury. Sanctify your simple dove. Your kindness is the shining light upon us. So fascinating imagery, dove, right? Commonly connected with Shekhinah. Banish the slave and the servant. These are feminine words. Shifcha ve'amma, right? So there's some kind of idea. Zohar has an idea that the Shekhinah, when we get exiled, the Shekhinah, meaning this divine feminine, is replaced with kind of a wicked stepmother type figure who is usually associated with Lilith, who's called the slave girl, Shifcha. So this language is evocative of that there, right? That you need to kind of get rid of that wrong one and put back the right one. Give her light from the love when you spoke to her, expand her homeland, make our sun shine out of sparkling rubies, awesome imagery in some way. We get to the imagery of royalty. Return her crown. To the lady upon her face she will shine, from your face, our sovereign. I mean, we said it before, by the way, and those who have learned Zohar with me will know that this Kabbalistic strain in Judaism is more or less doubtfully monotheistic, in that it sees a genuine personification of both a male and female aspect of God, and sees their relationship as being the central drama of religion. It gets even better, though, in my mind, as a modern and egalitarian practitioner of Judaism. She will be called and sought after, dressed in talit and tefillin, place a crown on her head, such that she luxuriates in her decorations. Right? So when this feminine aspect, whether it's Raḥel, whether it's Shekhinah, whatever it is, when it's restored, not only will she be desirable and sought after, but she will be decorated with tefillin and talit, which is a reading of the way it uses the language here. Establish out of your kindness and the shelter of David, your servant, the honor of your sovereignty. She will uncover us all. Strange, again, highly referential poetry, which is tapping into this imagery of Raḥel. Anything stand out from this relative to the other one we've seen?
I'm just wondering what the uncovering is. But never good when that happens.
Yeah, it is that word. It's your favorite word, tigaleh.
This for me is more about Raḥel than the Jewish people.
Right. It's
it's recognizing her sorrow,
yes,
and restoring her majesty. So it's more personal.
It is personal, and it's a funny inversion, isn't it? Because we saw before Raḥel praying for us, right? This feminine, divine, maternal figure praying on our behalf. And here we have a poem which is the opposite in some way. It's about us praying for her, right? That she should be restored, that she should have her crown back, she should have her city back, she should rebuild, etc. She should be kind of, returned to her rightful place. There's a common phrase in Hebrew which comes from a lot of this literature, that the crown should be restored to its glory. All of those are feminine words, and they evoke a certain kind of feminine image of actually things are only right when this feminine figure is in place as she should be. Here, it seems to be that there's almost an equation of Raḥel as a human figure with this mythological image of the Shekhinah, this divine feminine, that Raḥel is kind of one and the same with the Shekhinah, which is a pretty dramatic theology to undertake, and one that definitely toes the line of polytheism, as many of these things often do, but that's what makes it somewhat interesting as well. To go back, we're going to go back a little bit to the beginning and just kind of try and wrap up here. What do we learn about these? We have two very ancient texts from the rabbinic and from the biblical period, Jeremiah and Eicha Rabbah, and the two very modern texts from both Iraqi contemporary Kabbalistic rabbis writing poetry about this feminine figure. All of them are focused on this question of how Raḥel, as a symbol, represents our suffering and the role our suffering plays in the divine drama. How might we make this meaningful to us in our own time, especially with everything going on at the moment, and also in a kind of up-to-date and somewhat more gender egalitarian space?
I guess for me, I'm thinking, where is God in my suffering? Where my unquestionable faith in something much greater than ourselves, where is the end? What do I have to go through? It's in real terms, that's how it's relating to me now, is this has been going on for millennia. Is this something that is just inevitable and constant? And when will we return to a place where it's okay?
Notably, we never get to the end, do we? Raḥel's always promised, don't worry, someday it'll be fine. But we never see that. Instead, she continues to emerge into our literature. Right? This figure shows up this is over 2,000 years of literature here, as the same thing. The angry mother saying, "What are you doing? Fix this." And she never is completely satiated because it never is completely fixed.
No.
But is that comforting, would you say, Emma, as a kind of image that maybe there's someone out there looking after us, arguing for us, advocating for us? Or is it just kind of more concerning that she's actually listened to but never fulfilled?
Yeah, I mean currently it feels very hopeless. And this strong, amazing woman that has been through so much and is representative of so much, and yet all the hope, all the will, all the praying, all the anger, and we are still here, in this where we are.
She's still angry.
Yeah.
There's
no respite.
No, it's true. It's there's some comfort maybe in familiarity, but that's not itself that useful, is it?
However, the fact she continued, sorry.
No, please. No, go on.
No, the fact she doesn't give up, and there is no, just throwing her hands in the air and say, I'm not doing this anymore, and that throughout all the pain, there is always actually still hope of change.
Yeah. To imagine.
I think.
Say, Jackie. Yes.
Oh, sorry. Was someone else?
No, please.
For me, it emphasizes, I suppose, the difference between why Raḥel has not become the Virgin Mary to us. Because we look at it and go, yeah, you keep intervening on our behalf and doing what you can, but we know that it's not necessarily going to come to anything, but thanks for doing it anyway. We don't rely and put our faith in, and we don't put our faith in her. She's a character, and she is representative of pleading and of supplication, but in the same way that I suppose that's what she is a representative of, or she is a symbol of. She is not an actual being who can physically do this.
Yeah.
It's a representative of it. She doesn't actually become. Mind you, I think for some Kabbalists or some people in the Hasidic world, maybe she does, that you can pray to her and she can intercede on our behalf.
I mean, that would definitely be a bridge too far, even for the most wacky among us, right? To directly pray to an ancestor in that sense. But they get quite close at times, right? And there's definitely stuff in many communities where you go, ooh, not so sure. I think you're right that the interesting thing about a lot of this mystical literature in Judaism is that the symbols are so powerful, and yet they remain symbols, right? They remain abstract ideas to a way of, and that's why I often use the word myth rather than mysticism, because actually it is more like myths in that, they're stories that we tell in order to frame our understanding of the world and to put in context the events of history, but we don't necessarily take them as literal. Right, so the myth of Rachel weeping for her children clearly recurs so many times, from Jeremiah to Yehuda Fataya in 1920s, and yet it remains meaningful because it is that kind of literary trope and mythological figure which can help to tell a story, and one that I think feels maybe more relevant right now in some way when we're feeling less capable and feeling a little bit more helpless.
And I think from what Emma was saying, that you know, and I think this is something spoken of. This is just shows that what is happening now is the current iteration of something that is been going on for millennia.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that is comforting. I find it comforting that something is not new, because it means we've dealt with it before. We can deal with it now. Right? We've been through worse, and we've had some pretty good advocates on our side, real or mythological.
But if she is analogous of a world in a space, in a time, and we can see this recurring. So yes, I can see that we get through and we manage and we cope and we do. But we're so tired and weary. When do we get a break? You know, or is this accepting this is the way it is? This is, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe we can take some reassurance in her persistence, right? That, you know, that actually she continues to search out her children, continues to fight with God, continues to say this isn't right. It would be great if she could just sit back and go, everything's fine now, but that part of the story never occurs. So we at least you know, are in a similar position, I suppose, in that we can't really be complacent and go, yep, it's sorted now, we're all back, it's all fine. And I think that's the lesson a lot of people have learned in the last few weeks, is that we kind of can't quite take it for granted that just because, you know, half of the world's Jewish population has returned to the land of Israel and there's a strong and largely democratic and largely stable state, it doesn't necessarily ensure that there's safety. And that's a hard realization to come across.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts? I don't want to call on anyone, but I'm curious, Daron, you were kind of the engine behind us doing this learning today. I'm curious if you want to end us off. Do you want to say a few words? You're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Fantastic. It's just to say that the last bit of the paragraph, ושבו בנים לגבולם, it's basically what is written at the airport when you come into Israel. I don't know if you remember, but when you sit on the airport, that's the bit that is written kind of in big letters. And it's just interesting. It's maybe very symbolic to what we are kind of trying to learn today.
Yeah.
So this is something that, you know, when they say it's the repetition there is existence constantly. And this paragraph probably now, I never thought about it as part of the paragraph, but I always looked at it when you come to the airport. That's the bits that, you know, confront you first.
That's right.
Which is interesting.
Giant letters.
Yes.
Can you remind us what it means, that those?
The direct translation, it's probably written at the end of the paragraph, and I need to look at it in order not to make it justice, but I cannot see the direct
children
translation.
Will return to their borders.
Oh.
To the border.
Yeah, to the end of the Jeremiah passage. So
that's the first sentence. When you just land and you look at and you look at the airport, that's in big letters appears there, which is pretty interesting about what we're saying about the repetition maybe, and about the things that there's always something that is not right. And I really believe that it's so symbolic that we are, as part of our way to deal with tough stuff, we need the voice within us, or a representative voice that probably
we lost you there for a second, Daron. Thank you for learning with me a little bit. It's a strange, unusual topic, but seeing as the day coincided with what is today, I believe, the 18th day of the war, it seemed like an opportunity to sit and reflect on actually how familiar some of these themes are. And I'm actually really pleased. I don't know if Jerome can hear us because he's disappeared, but this the pointing out of that language from Jeremiah, that verse we read, there's hope for your future and your children will return to your borders. That continues to be extremely relevant, even in such troubling times. And maybe there's some comfort in thinking that Raḥel is out there somewhere yelling at God on our behalf right now. So thank you. Thanks for
Thank you very much.
this evening.
Very good.
And
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you very much.